What did you make of the opening statements from the lawyers? Because that kind of lays out where both sides are headed here.
Yeah, it really did. So you had a study in contrast where Carol's lawyer was saying she suffered terribly. She sleeps with a gun in her bed. Her life has been turned upside down. And Alina Habba, Trump's lawyer, was saying, oh, she loves it. It puts her in the limelight, et cetera. Remember, this is just about damages. And both parties actually mentioned the previous sexual assault. One to say that this is what he'd done, the other to say that it's not about that anymore. But tomorrow she's going to testify, and I don't credit the notion that Trump will testify, and even if he does, he's not really probative here. So it's going to be the whole centerpiece. This was in miniature, the opening of what we should expect tomorrow, a long direct and then a bruising cross-examination with these two different pictures of E. Jean Carroll.
Jeff, what do you think Trump is going to do? Harry just laid it out. This is the second time Trump and Carroll have gone to court. Last time he said he was going to testify, but he didn't. You think he's going to now? Because now he's really using all this court situation as a big campaign event.
Yeah, again, it's not clear to me if he'll testify, but I think it's a safe bet that he will make further appearances. Because the court appearances, Steph, for Donald Trump are politically useful, especially as he has premised his reelection bid on this fight, this fight for his supporters and this focus on retribution against his enemies. He fired off a post on his social media account, his Truth Social account today, basically saying, oh, I would have preferred to have been in New Hampshire with you today, but I had to go to New York to fight this Trump-hating judge. And for his base of supporters, they believe that these 91 counts and these at least 4 cases, that they don't necessarily amount to a prosecution, but a political persecution that is basically being fueled by the deep state and the Biden Justice Department. Of course, that's not the case, but that is the resident argument that he is making. And so for him to go to court, it basically allows him to further that message. It's also, time is a finite resource for campaigns. And in many ways, he could spend an hour in New Hampshire in a middle school gym and reach 1,000 people, or he could go to court like he did last week and speak before the cameras, and 100,000 or more people would see him on cable TV. So in that way, it's politically useful, too.
Harry, do you think that's why Trump shows up in court? Because Jeff just said it. He doesn't need to be there. It certainly doesn't help him legally. But beyond getting the attention, firing up his base, is he also, I don't know, trying to intimidate E. Jean Carroll or try to push the judge, try to aggravate the judge so much that maybe the judge overreacts and Trump finds an opening to appeal?
Strange strategy. Look, I agree 100% with what Jeff said. We have more than in any other case I ever remember, a braiding together of the law and the politics. This guy just today, 22 more times defamed her. Disastrous legal strategy, but it's obviously a political strategy. In terms of tomorrow, you see right now E. Jean Carroll turning around at an important point. Yes, I think he's going to be glowering at her, trying to intimidate. And whether or not it works, that inherent drama is what he'll then take to the cameras. And it is more effective for him than showing up in New Hampshire. I think it's been quite clear, but 100% apparent in this case that he does it for his own kind of long shot political, maybe not so long shot political strategy, and it's only counterproductive in any courtroom where he takes it on the chin again and again and again, and he will again this week.
All right, Susan, new topic. I want to head back to Iowa because last night after the caucus, I believe you had the tweet of the night where you wrote that all of this hullabaloo, referring to everything that happened in Iowa, is over fewer than 100,000 voters in the midst of a deep freeze in Iowa in a country of 330 million plus people. Let's talk about this because I thought, wow, all of us talking about this is the most important night, and you basically took all the air out of the balloon. Somebody on Twitter said, yes, Susan said the smartest thing. Now you'll never get to see it on cable news, which is exactly why you're here tonight. So explain.
You know, what can I say? Famous for a tweet. I don't know. It's a little bit of a dubious honor for those of us who like to write in longer form than that. But, you know, look, I've been a skeptic of Iowa for quite some time. It doesn't have the best record, obviously, in recent years of predicting the winners. See President Pete Buttigieg or President Ted Cruz, who won the first Iowa caucus that Donald Trump ran in back in 2016. It's obviously a highly unrepresentative state, and this year in particular, it seems to be even more divorced from the reality of America in 2024. So because of that deep freeze, I just saw that it was something like 7% only of the registered voters in the Republican Party in Iowa who participated yesterday. Of course, that's even smaller of a percentage of the overall number of registered voters in Iowa who participated in this. And yet we're looking at headlines that say Donald Trump's triumph in Iowa, Donald Trump's magnificent victory. Again, I think Trump, as always, is a Rorschach test. You can read it either way. You can say it was a huge victory for him. You can say it shows his dominance over the party. You can also say that nearly half of the Republicans who came out in the middle of a deep freeze did so to register their discontent with Donald Trump. He says he's essentially an incumbent in this race. Well, if an incumbent president did that poorly, we know what the headlines would be, and it wouldn't be to call it a triumph.
Damn, Susan, you just put him in the deep freeze. Jeff, same question to you. What do you think?
I will say this, though. Iowa does represent what has happened to the Republican Party. Donald Trump won every cohort of voter who showed up at the Iowa caucuses. He, of course, won white evangelical voters. Of course he did. He, of course, won voters who identify as conservative, but he also won voters who identify as moderate. He won not only voters who don't have a college degree, but he won voters who do have a college degree by decisive numbers. And, you know, the political physics no longer apply to Donald Trump, at least conventional political physics don't. And I think what was revealed in a lot of the entrance interviews and voter surveys was that Donald Trump has basically found a way to get Republican voters to completely rethink this notion of electability. Typically, a voter will think, well, which candidate has the best personality, the kind of temperament, the kind of experience, background, policies that could win over the biggest slice of the electorate? That is what makes someone electable. Not anymore. What Republicans see as electable is who will fight the hardest for me. Who basically will give voice to the issues I care about and fight the hardest. And time after time after time, no matter the issue, people have found a way to say that Donald Trump represents that figure, that choice for them, despite the fact that he's facing 91 felony counts and that his candidacy could collapse at any moment. You know, that to me is phenomenal, and that is what was born out of the Iowa caucuses.
And that's why I want to talk about who are the Republican voters. Susan, an NBC Iowa entrance poll found that a majority of Republican caucus goers said that a Trump conviction would not matter to them. It might not matter to them, but there's a whole lot of silent Republicans, right? The business class, rich people, and they vote Republican. They want their taxes lowered. They don't want regulation, but they don't want chaos. Do you really think that quiet universe of Trump donors and Trump voters, they'd be down with a conviction?
Well, look, if we're going to have a general election conversation, let's have a general election conversation. The truth is, when it comes to general elections in America today, Iowa voters are meaningless. And in fact, the vast majority, unfortunately, of American voters don't really get a say. In our deeply polarized country, the election, once again, is going to come down to a small handful of battleground states, maybe 6, maybe 7, certainly nowhere near 10 or more. And in those states, could a certain, even small percentage of Republican voters who refuse to vote for a president, a former president convicted of felonies, make a difference? Absolutely. There's a strong argument, in fact, that in 2020, it was a small number of disaffected Republicans in the 6 key battleground states that gave the election to Joe Biden. And by the way, yes, he did legally win. It doesn't matter. Unfortunately, it's a tragedy, but it doesn't matter in an electoral sense. 2/3 of the Republican caucus goers, I believe, in that same poll said they did not believe that Joe Biden was the legitimate president of the United States because of Trump's lies. In the end, they aren't the voters who will decide the outcome in the Electoral College of this election. And it's going to come down to people. It could be a small number of Republicans. So I do think that's a significant constituency to be looking at if we're going to have the general election conversation.